Welcome to the latest episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. This is episode 251. What happens to food when you cook it? A guide to different cooking methods. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. I'm Shelley Royale, registered dietitian nutritionist, and today I'm addressing another topic of common misinformation and a question that comes up a lot in my work. Does cooking destroy the nutrients? Now, for most of us, this is something we do to food every day without giving it a second thought. We cook it. We roast vegetables. We grill chicken. We might microwave leftovers. We boil pasta, saute onions, bake bread. And then all of a sudden, someone will pop up and say that cooking destroys nutrients. Really? All of them? This is one of those nutrition statements that takes something with a little bit of truth behind it and turns it into something much bigger than it actually is. Yes, cooking changes food. Of course it does. That's often the entire reason that we cook it. Heat changes texture, flavor, color, digestibility, and sometimes nutrient content. But does cooking destroy the nutritional value of food? No. And in some cases, cooking can actually make certain nutrients easier for our bodies to access and absorb. So today I want to talk about what actually happens to food when we cook it. How does heat, water, and cooking time affect nutrients? Why cooking is important for reasons that go far beyond nutrition, and how different cooking methods compare. And as usual, this isn't going to be a one of these is a clear winner, because that's rarely how nutrition works. All right, so let's start with that question I hear the most often. Does cooking destroy nutrients? And the answer is some nutrients can decrease during cooking, but we need a lot more context than that. Different nutrients respond differently to heat, water, oxygen, and time. And some vitamins are relatively sensitive, while others are quite stable. And minerals generally hold up very well during cooking. And some nutrients actually become more available to us after a food is cooked. So when someone says cooking destroys nutrients, that statement is far too broad to be useful. So let's start with the nutrients that tend to be the most vulnerable. And these are water-soluble vitamins. So vitamin C and most of the B vitamins, there's 8 different B vitamins. These are the water-soluble vitamins. So that means they can dissolve in water. They can also be sensitive to heat. So if you take a vegetable, put it into a pot of water, boil it for a long time, and then pour that water down the drain, some of those water-soluble vitamins are going to go with it. Yes, that's true. And vitamin C is especially sensitive to heat and cooking time. So let's use broccoli as an example. Broccoli contains vitamin C. And that surprises some people because we tend to think about vitamin C as being from oranges and other citrus fruits, which it is, but broccoli is a source too. So if you boil broccoli, some of the vitamin C in the broccoli may be lost. And this is where nutrition information can start sounding more alarming than it needs to. Someone hears boiling destroys the vitamin C in broccoli, or whatever vegetable is going to be boiled. And suddenly we've gone from some vitamin C may be reduced during cooking to there's no point in eating broccoli. And that may seem like a leap to you, but I hear this. And of course, these are two very different statements. First, broccoli still contains many nutrients after it's cooked. Second, broccoli probably isn't your only source of vitamin C. At least I hope it isn't. So if you regularly eat fruits and vegetables, so fruits and vegetables, you're likely getting vitamin C from multiple foods throughout the day and the week. So maybe you had strawberries with breakfast, or there were peppers in your lunch. Maybe you ate an orange as a snack and you had tomatoes with dinner. So nutrition doesn't happen one nutrient, one food, or one meal at a time. It happens as a pattern. So yes, boiling your broccoli may reduce some of vitamin C in it, but that doesn't mean boiled broccoli is nutritionally useful. Please eat the broccoli and eat the other foods rich in vitamin C as well. So where do these nutrients go? So that's the other important point here. Sometimes the nutrients aren't actually destroyed, they're simply moved. So if water-soluble vitamins leach from vegetables into cooking water, they may still be in the liquid. So what happens if you're making soup? You're not pouring the liquid down the drain, you eat the liquid. And those nutrients haven't necessarily disappeared from your meal. They're just in another place. So this is one reason soups and stews are a different situation from boiling vegetables and draining the water to eating the whole thing. So the cooking method matters, but so does what you do with the cooking liquid. And people have asked me this, if you pour the water, you boil the broccoli and you pour the water into a glass and drink that, is that still good? Sure, if that's something you want to do and something that you'll tolerate, yes, you'll get benefit from that. Now, some nutrients become more available. So flipping this from cooking doesn't only reduce nutrients, it can make some nutrients more available to the body. So cooking breaks down plant cell walls and changes the physical structure of food. And that can make certain nutrients easier for our bodies to access. So you might have heard this with tomatoes. Cooking tomatoes can increase the availability of lycopene, which is a carotenoid that gives tomatoes their red color. And the same general idea applies to some other plant compounds. Cooking can help release them from the food structure, making them easier for our body to absorb. And then there are minerals. Calcium, iron, zinc, magnesium, and other minerals are generally much more heat stable than vitamins like vitamin C. So you don't simply cook the iron out of a food. In some cases, cooking can actually improve mineral availability because it breaks down food structures or reduces compounds that interfere with absorption. And that's true with iron. The iron in plant-based foods isn't as absorbable as the iron in animal-based foods, and animal-based foods are ones we also cook. So once again, saying raw is more nutritious doesn't always work, or isn't always meaningful, I should say. Sometimes raw provides more of certain nutrients, sometimes cooked makes other nutrients more available. So we can eat both. And then cooking can improve digestibility. So cooking also changes how easily we digest food. So think about a raw potato. Technically, you could eat one, I suppose. Would I recommend sitting down and eating a raw roasted potato like an apple? No. Cooking changes the starch structure and makes potatoes much easier to eat and digest. And the same things happens with many grains. Think about uncooked rice or dried beans or raw oats compared to cooked oatmeal. Cooking changes the physical and chemical structure of these foods in ways that make them so much more usable by the body. And in some cases, cooking isn't optional, it's necessary. Some foods need to be cooked. And this is something that gets lost when people become overly focused on preserving every possible nutrient. Food safety. We cook many foods because we need to. Raw chicken is not more nutritious because it hasn't been exposed to heat. It's a food safety hazard. And this applies to many meats, poultry, seafood, and eggs. Cooking helps destroy harmful microorganisms that cause foodborne illness. And as we've seen from foodborne illness outbreaks over the years, proper cooking temperatures are important. Cooking can also reduce naturally occurring compounds in some foods that may interfere with nutrient absorption or can cause digestive problems. Like beans are a great example. Beans need to be properly prepared and cooked. You don't grab a handful of dry kidney beans out of the bag and eat them as a snack. And not just because you can't really digest them, it's actually dangerous. Raw or undercooked kidney beans contain high levels of a lectin called phytohemagglutinin, Gluten. I knew I was going to struggle with this one. PHA, phytohemagglutinin. And that can make you really sick. But most people aren't eating raw kidney beans. As long as we have proper soaking and proper cooking, it makes beans completely safe and edible. And then grains are another example. Rice, barley, farro, and many other grains generally need cooking before we can even eat them. So cooking isn't ruining these foods. Cooking makes them a food we can actually eat. But cooking is more than just looking at the nutrients. As some people just look at food as a source of nutrients, but this is something we want to take a look at here or pay attention to and not focus on exclusively on vitamins and minerals. Food needs to taste good, and cooking creates flavor. Roasting brings out sweetness in vegetables. Grilling creates flavors you don't get from steaming. Sautéing onions changes them completely. Think about a raw onion compared to a slowly cooked onion. Same vegetable, but a very different experience. I made caramelized onions just the other day. 2 whole onions turned into caramelized onions, much smaller amount, but a very, very different taste. Heat creates chemical reactions that change flavor, aroma, color, and texture. And this is an important distinction here, because if roasting Brussels sprouts makes you enjoy Brussels sprouts, that's better, that's useful. If grilling zucchini means you'll actually eat zucchini, then grill it. If sautéing spinach with olive oil and garlic makes you want to have a second serving, or at least have that first serving, great. We can spend so much time asking which method preserves 3% of a particular vitamin that we forget the obvious question, which version are you going to actually eat? Because that's important. All right, so I want to talk about the different cooking methods. So now that we've cleared up, or at least I hope I've cleared up, that cooking isn't simply destroying nutrients, I do want to talk about some of the common ways we cook food. And I want to be clear before we start. I'm not ranking these in any order from healthiest to least or anything like that. These are just different methods that work for different foods in different situations. They each have benefits and considerations. So first up, I'll start with roasting. Roasting uses dry heat, usually in an oven, at a relatively high temperature. We roast vegetables, potatoes, meats, poultry, and many other foods. And one of the biggest benefits of roasting is the flavor. Roasting encourages browning and caramelization, which can transform the flavor of foods. So if you think about raw cauliflower compared to roasted cauliflower, or raw Brussels sprouts compared to roasted Brussels sprouts with crispy edges, it's really a completely different experience, definitely. I almost feel like it's a different food sometimes. But from a nutrition standpoint, roasting doesn't involve submerging food in water, so you don't have the same issue of the water-soluble vitamins being leached into the cooking liquid. There can still be some nutrient loss from the heat, especially with longer cooking times. But remember, what I've already discussed here is that doesn't mean food is no longer without or doesn't have any nutritional value anymore. If roasting vegetables makes them taste better to you and helps you eat more of them, I would consider that a pretty significant nutritional benefit. Now, baking. Baking is similar to roasting because, of course, it uses dry heat in an oven. And we usually use the word baking for foods like bread and casseroles and muffins and desserts, although there is technically plenty of overlap between baking and roasting. The nutritional effects depend heavily on what you're actually cooking. So if you bake a casserole containing vegetables, whole grains, and protein, the nutrient changes will depend on all those ingredients and how long they cook. Now, if you bake bread, heat changes the starches and the protein and creates the structure that makes bread what it is. So again, cooking isn't taking nutrients away, it's transforming the food. Now, air frying. What about air frying? Air fryers are the it appliance right now. They are incredibly popular. And despite the name, an air fryer is just really all it is a small convection oven. So if you have a convection oven, we just call it an oven. I call my oven an oven, and I can do convection or not. I don't call it an air fryer. But anyway, an air fryer circulates very hot air around the food, which helps create a crisp texture. And so one advantage is that you can often get that crispy texture using less added oil than you would with traditional deep frying. And cooking times may also be relatively short. Now, from a nutrient standpoint, air frying is similar to other dry heat cooking methods. So some heat-sensitive nutrients may decrease, others will remain stable. The bigger difference comes down to how much oil is used compared to traditional frying. Now, does owning an air fryer make everything you cook healthy? No. And you knew I was going to say that. But it can be a useful cooking method, especially if you enjoy crisp vegetables, potatoes, fish, and other foods without using as much added oil as deep frying. Now, pan frying uses oil and moderate to high heat. So the food is usually directly on a layer of oil, although with much less than deep frying. And one obvious consideration is that food can absorb some of the oil. And that adds fat and calories. Even if it's healthy fat, it's adding fat and calories. So that doesn't necessarily make the food unhealthy. Fat has an important role in nutrition. It provides essential fatty acid, it helps us absorb fat-soluble vitamins, and it contributes flavor and satisfaction. What is important here is the type and the amount of oil used. So does the overall meal. Pan frying can create great texture and flavor, so that's one reason it's used in cuisines all over the world. So it's usually just part of an overall meal. Part of the meal is pan fried. Now, sautéing also uses oil, so this is similar to pan frying, but sautéing uses usually a smaller amount of oil and a relatively short cooking time. And so this is one of my favorite examples of why we shouldn't obsess over making vegetables completely fat-free. If you saute vegetables in a little oil, yes, you've added calories. You've also added some unsaturated fats, and that fat may help your body absorb certain fat-soluble vitamins and plant compounds from the vegetables. As I mentioned earlier with tomatoes and lycopene, heated tomatoes with a little bit of fat, that lycopene is so much more absorbable and useful to us. And meanwhile, with sautéing, the relatively short cooking time can help preserve many of the nutrients. So is steamed broccoli healthier than broccoli sautéed with olive oil and garlic? Yeah, that's not really a question that's helpful or useful. They're both broccoli, they're both nutritious, and if you prefer sautéed, great. And if you eat that more often, great. Again, it comes down what is the one that you're going to eat. All right, so next up, boiling. So I've talked about boiling a lot, and this is the one that I brought up at the beginning because that's the one that tends to get the most criticism about nutrient loss. So of course, boiling means cooking a food submerged in water, and usually that's about 212 degrees Fahrenheit depending on altitude. So the higher the altitude, the lower the temperature is when water begins to boil. So where I live, water begins to boil at about 197 degrees depending on the day. I don't worry about that, but we need to cook things a little bit longer if we're cooking something that needs to be cooked. Anyway, not as important. Boiling. Boiling can result in greater losses of some water-soluble vitamins compared with other cooking methods. And again, let's stick with the broccoli. I'm on the broccoli roll today. Vitamin C and certain B vitamins, as I said already, can leach from the food into the cooking water. And the longer something cooks, the more water you use, the greater those losses may be. But that doesn't mean boiling is a bad cooking method for other foods. We boil pasta, we boil rice and other grains, depending on how we prepare them. We boil potatoes, we cook beans in water. And sometimes boiling is simply the easiest and most appropriate way to prepare a food. I really don't know another way to cook pasta unless we stuck it in a casserole and cooked it. There's also ways to retain some of those nutrients. So as I mentioned previously, if you're making a soup or stew, you're eating the cooking liquid. So some of those water-soluble nutrients are moved into the water and it's still part of your meal. And then, as I said, even if you drain the water, the food still has some nutritional value. So I want to emphasize that because people get so focused on maximizing every single nutrient that we lose perspective. If you like boiled green beans, eat boiled green beans. It still counts. All right, so steaming. Steaming is often presented as the healthiest way to cook vegetables, and nutritionally it does have advantages. So instead of submerging food directly into water, steam surrounds and cooks the food. And because the food isn't sitting in the water, fewer water-soluble vitamins may leach out compared to boiling. Steaming can also help vegetables maintain their color and texture, especially if they aren't overcooked. So broccoli, green beans, carrots, asparagus, many vegetables work great with steaming. But this doesn't mean you need a vegetable. You don't need to steam every vegetable you eat. You only do this if you like them that way. Because I don't care how many nutrients steaming preserves, if you hate steamed vegetables and leave them sitting on your plate, the nutritional value is kind of pointless. All right, handful more here to go. Grilling. So grilling uses direct, often high heat, and can cook foods pretty quickly. And we tend to think of meat when we talk about grilling. Steaks, burgers, chicken, hot dogs. But you can grill all kinds of foods. All kinds of food. Fish, vegetables, fruit, bread, pizza. Grilling can create incredible flavor because of the browning and the caramelization that happens at high temperatures. And because food often cooks relatively quickly, that shorter cooking time can help preserve some of the nutrients. But I do want to mention this, that grilling can also bring up another issue, and that's charring. When meats are cooked at a very high temperature, especially over an open flame, certain compounds can form. You may have heard of these in the past. They're HCAs, or heterocyclic amines, or PAHs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. These are mouthful. Anyway, these are compounds that have raised health concerns because exposure to high levels has been associated with cancer risk. Now, does this mean you shouldn't grill? No. It means we don't want to regularly eat heavily charred meat. So you can reduce charring by avoiding prolonged exposure to the intense flames, flipping food regularly, or even just trimming away those heavily burned portions, and using marinades. And you can also grill at a lower temperature or use indirect heat when appropriate. So I just want to remind people, grilling isn't just limited to meat. It may seem obvious for some people, but a lot of people don't think of this. Grilled peaches, grilled pineapple, these are so good. Grilled zucchini, peppers, asparagus, corn, onions, these are all great options. And if grilling helps you enjoy more vegetables, that's another benefit. All right, microwaving. We need to talk about the microwave because microwaves have this strange reputation for a very long time. People will say things still to this day. I don't microwave my food because it destroys all the nutrients. Or they'll call the microwave nuking food. And that sounds dramatic. And maybe people are using it hyperbolically, but it's not nuking the food. That's not how microwaves work. Microwave ovens use electromagnetic waves that cause water molecules and other molecules within food to move, and that generates heat. The food cooks because it gets hot. And from a nutrient standpoint, microwaving can actually be one of the better cooking methods for preserving nutrients. For two big reasons: short cooking times and very little water. So remember, what tends to contribute to nutrient loss is heat, time, and water. So if microwaving uses less time and less water than boiling, you've got a benefit there. So microwaving broccoli with a small amount of water may actually retain more of those water-soluble vitamins than if you boil it in a large pot of water and drain it. And microwaving doesn't make food radioactive. It doesn't nuke the nutrients out of your vegetables. It's just another cooking method, and a pretty convenient one. Frozen vegetables that steam right in the bag, one of my favorite things. Leftovers reheated in the microwave, fine. And even baked potato cooked in the microwave because you don't want to wait an hour for the oven or an hour plus the preheating time? Absolutely. Convenience is important as well, and that's okay. If the microwave makes it easier to prepare nutritious food, use it. Now, I do want to address deep frying here. I didn't include deep frying in the original list when I was thinking about this, but it is worth mentioning because some people are probably wondering about it. So, of course, deep frying means completely or mostly submerging food in hot oil. And that changes the calorie and fat content of the food because the food absorbs some of the oil during cooking. High temperatures can also affect certain heat-sensitive nutrients. But does that mean fried food can never fit into a healthy eating pattern? No, because it comes back to the same question about many foods. How much are you eating? How often are you eating it? And then what else are you eating it? Obviously, French fries aren't nutritionally identical to a baked potato just because they both started out as potatoes. The cooking method, of course, changes the nutrition profile. So I say potatoes aren't the problem, it's what we do to the potatoes that become more of a problem. So we don't need to jump from acknowledging the difference to declaring that you should never eat French fries again either. So that's not necessary. So let me answer this question that'll come up. What is the healthiest way to cook vegetables? Well, I want to disappoint people, but you probably knew this was coming. There isn't one. It really depends on the vegetable, the nutrient we're talking about, and importantly, what are you actually eating? If the only goal was to preserve certain water-soluble vitamins, methods that use less water and shorter cooking times would generally come out ahead. So steaming, microwave, or quick sautéing, because those methods tend to preserve more of certain nutrients compared with prolonged boiling. But that's only one part of the equation here. Roasting can make vegetables taste better, taste sweeter, creates textures people enjoy. Sautéing vegetables with a little oil may improve the absorption of certain fat-soluble vitamins and plant compounds. Cooking tomatoes can make lycopene more available. Cooking carrots can increase the availability of certain carotenoids. And grilling vegetables create flavors you simply can't get from steaming them. So what is the healthiest method? I tend to say maybe the better question is which cooking methods help you eat vegetables regularly? Because that matters so much more than trying to optimize every milligram of every nutrient. Now, I do want to talk about another question that will come up. Are raw vegetables healthier than cooked? Some people assume raw automatically means more nutritious when it comes to vegetables. And again, this isn't a simple or straightforward answer. Raw vegetables may retain more of certain heat-sensitive nutrients, but cooked vegetables may make other nutrients more available. So eat both. You don't need to choose raw versus cooked. Have raw bell peppers with hummus. Roast vegetables for dinner. Put spinach in a salad. Sauté spinach another day. Eat raw carrots. Roast carrots. Eat fresh tomatoes in a salad or cooked in tomato sauce. Different preparation methods provide different benefits, and we don't have to stick to just one of them. Variety applies not only to which foods we eat, but also how we prepare them. So what about adding fat when cooking? Because here's another area people sometimes just get overly focused on calories. Adding oil when cooking vegetables adds calories. Yes. Oil is fat and provides 9 calories per gram. But that doesn't mean cooking vegetables with oil is somehow wrong. Fat helps with the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins, including vitamin A, D, E, and K, as well as some of the carotenoids and other plant compounds. So roasting vegetables with olive oil or sautéing vegetables in oil isn't ruining them. Of course, portions still matter. But there's a difference between lightly coating vegetables with oil or pouring half a cup of oil into the pan without thinking about it. But on the flip side, eliminating all fat isn't necessary either. Fat contributes flavor, it helps with satisfaction, and it helps us absorb certain nutrients. So once again, nutrition is rarely improved by taking one fact completely out of context. All right, I do have a few more points here, so let's address them. Does overcooking matter? Absolutely. Cooking time does matter. Generally, the longer foods are exposed to heat, the greater potential loss of heat-sensitive nutrients. So this is especially relevant with vegetables. So here comes the broccoli again. If you boil broccoli until it's gray, green, and falling apart, you've probably lost most of the more heat-sensitive nutrients compared to if you lightly steamed it. You've also lost quite a bit of texture. But even then, I'm not going to tell you that broccoli has become nutritionally worthless, because it hasn't. We can simply recognize that cooking vegetables until they're extremely soft may result in greater nutrient losses. If you enjoy vegetables with a little more texture, shorter cooking times can help preserve both nutrients and quality. All right, so after hearing all this, you may be wondering whether you need to change anything. Should you change how you cook? Probably not dramatically. If you boil every vegetable you eat for 45 minutes and throw away the cooking water, we may need to talk about other things going on here. But if you're already roasting some vegetables, steaming others, microwaving frozen vegetables, grilling, sautéing, all these different cooking methods throughout the week, you're doing exactly what I'm talking about here, and that's variety, different methods, different foods, and you don't need to micromanage every cooking decision based on which method preserves the absolute maximum amount of one nutrient. And trust me, there are people out there that are like this. So, let's bring us back to the initial question. Are nutrient losses from cooking actually significant? So yes, nutrient losses do happen during cooking, but are they significant enough that you should worry about them? For most people eating a varied diet, usually not. Think about everything you eat over the course of the day. Maybe you have berries with breakfast, a sandwich with veggies at lunch, fruit as a snack, roasted vegetables with dinner. Maybe some of those are raw, some are cooked, some are frozen, some may be canned. You're getting nutrients from many different sources. And if steaming preserves slightly more vitamin C in broccoli than boiling does, that difference probably isn't going to determine whether your overall diet provides enough vitamin C. Your overall eating pattern matters far more. And remember, cooking can increase the availability of some nutrients. So focusing only on nutrient losses gives us an incomplete picture. Cooking makes food more nutritious. So we need to remember why humans cook food in the first place. Safety, digestibility, flavor, texture, enjoyment, variety. Cooking allows us to eat foods we wouldn't otherwise eat. It also protects us from foodborne illness. It makes foods easier to digest, and it creates some of the foods and flavors we love. Think about bread, soup, roasted veggies, grilled fish, a pot of beans, a baked potato, a stir fry. Cooking is not an unfortunate thing we have to do to food while desperately trying to protect nutrients. Cooking is part of how we make food safe, nourishing, and enjoyable, as well as edible. So, let's get to the bottom line information here. Cooking changes food. That's the point. Some heat-sensitive and water-soluble vitamins may decrease during cooking, particularly with longer cooking times and methods that use a lot of water. Minerals are generally heat-stable. Some nutrients and beneficial plant compounds become more available after cooking. Cooking can improve digestibility. It can reduce certain naturally occurring compounds that interfere with nutrient absorption. And importantly, cooking makes foods safe to eat. Different cooking methods have different benefits and considerations. Steaming and microwaving tend to preserve water-soluble nutrients well because they use little water and relatively short cooking times. Boiling may result in more nutrients moving into the cooking water, but those nutrients can still be consumed if the liquid is part of the dish. Roasting, grilling, and sautéing create flavors and textures that make foods, especially vegetables, more enjoyable. And then adding some fat during cooking isn't inherently a problem and may actually help with absorption of certain nutrients. And no single cooking method needs to be declared the healthiest. So if someone asks you or says to you, does cooking destroy nutrients? The short answer is cooking changes nutrients. Some decrease, some become more available, and those changes need to be considered alongside everything else cooking does to our food. If you're eating a variety of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, beans, protein foods, and other nutrient-dense foods, you don't need to worry about whether steaming your broccoli would have preserved a little bit more vitamin C than roasting it. Eat some foods raw, cook others, steam, roast, grill, sauté, microwave, boil. Use methods that work for the food you're preparing in the way you enjoy eating it. Because the difference between eating vegetables regularly and not eating them at all matters far more than the small nutrient differences between roasting and steaming. And as I often say, I say it all the time, it's the overall pattern that matters. Not one food, not one meal, and definitely not one cooking method. All right, this was a longer one this week. So thanks for sticking with me. Thanks you for joining me for another episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. If you've ever avoided microwaving vegetables because you thought it destroyed nutrients or wondered whether you should be steaming everything you eat, I hope this episode gave you some perspective. And maybe you could stop worrying about it or wondering about how you cook the broccoli or whatever other vegetable you wanted to talk about. As always, you can find the companion blog for this episode linked in the show notes, and you'll find more information about all those different cooking methods I covered here and how they affect food. And if you have found this episode helpful, or you have somebody telling you this all the time, that cooking destroys nutrients, share it, who might want to learn from this as well. All right, everyone. Until next week, take care and bye for now.